think they both got emails about Tuesday and Wednesday, so really appreciate them stepping in at the last minute because people who were going to do it before had other things come up. So yeah, it's really great to have you. Just like to welcome you all to the session today. It's sort of going to be the sort of culmination of Public Health Intensive Week, and it's called Intensive for that very reason, and I'm sure you've felt that this week. So you've been provided with a huge amount of information in a short space of time. You've looked at definitions, you've looked at models, state of public health in New Zealand, problems in public health, examples, and then you've taken a deep dive into a particular area and come up with a campaign. And now we're about to hear the results of that work. So, and you've also had to navigate the team dynamics as well. So just well done to everyone for getting to this point. We're almost there. So some explanation of how our session's going to run today. So each group's going to have 15 minutes. Polly is going to be timing and she'll give you a signal when you've got 1 minute to go. And then we're going to have 5 minutes Q&A, and then there'll be a quick changeover. And we're going to have 2 sessions before we have a break. So we're going to have, what are we going to have? We're going to have online harm, I think it is, and disability before the break. Is that right? Yeah. Yep, and then the rest after the break. And then we're going to have time for student evaluations and for the assessors to score the presentations and have a little chat, and then they'll decide on a winner, and then we're going to have the wrap up at around 3:10. So, and I do recommend that when each group comes up, the whole group comes up, if you could please. And I think that's everything. Is it? Yeah. So just hand it over to the first group, online harm. I knew there was something else. Just asking you about questions. I really encourage you to challenge your fellow colleagues. I mean, you've learned a lot about public health, so it'd be really great to encourage questions from the floor, please.
Is there a clicker? Is it just this?
I'm probably
Okay, cool. All right. Let's take it away then. All right. Kia ora, we're group 22. We had online harm as our topic. I'm Charlie, by the way. So the online world plays a key role in all of our lives. However, recently the shift towards monetisation of the internet has meant that there's an increasing tension between the commercial interests and the well-being of children. Advertising is a prime example of this. The large technology companies profit from collecting personal data and selling targeted advertising. The alcohol and gambling industries benefit from using this targeted advertising to reach young audiences and establish a lifelong consumers. It's internationally recognised that that marketing is a direct and causal relationship with consumption. Children are particularly more vulnerable to the digital advertising because their ability to recognise persuasive marketing, understand its commercial intent, and critically evaluate risk is still developing. As a result, this online advertising can shape their attitudes, preferences and behaviours before they're able to make fully informed decisions. So it's worrying how digital marketing delivers personalised advertising to young audiences through social media algorithms, influencer marketing and user data collection, their age, their interests, behaviours and online activity. And the scale of this is not minor. Approximately 72 million data points are collected for each child by the age of 13. These data points are then used to personally target the child. In 2018, it was found that Facebook alone flagged 740,000 children for showing an interest in gambling, and even more flagged as showing an interest in alcohol. Due to the interactive nature of digital marketing, the exposure to advertising generated is frequent and more difficult to avoid than traditional advertising. I'm sure we've all seen images like this pop up on our phones. People are aware of it. 71% of children reported seeing alcohol marketing across social media, and from these, 41% engaged with the alcohol advertising. Alarmingly, the exposure to harmful added products were found to be more common among the 14 to 17-year-old age group compared to those older. This indicates an increasingly predatory approach of the digital marketing space. Māori are often early adopters of technology and therefore more at risk of being exposed to harmful digital marketing space at a younger age. In addition, there's found to be targeted marketing towards Māori and Pacific populations. With regards to alcohol advertising, a New Zealand study found that Māori had 5 times a higher exposure rate than non-Māori. Pacific people had 3 times higher exposure rate. A separate study additionally found that online casinos target Māori audiences, and Māori disproportionately account for 30% of the total gambling harm, despite being only 17% of the population. This targeted advertising compounds on the background of historical trauma. Colonisation, its displacement of land, loss of language and cultural identity has created deep intergenerational trauma, which is a recognised driver for the development for high rates of substance use and gambling. This trauma is also a determinant for unhealthy homes and isolated communities, another recognised driver of addiction behaviours. While not the isolated cause of increased rates of addictive behaviours among Māori populations, this targeted advertising is a driving force for deepening the already existing inequalities. Overall, it's a reflection of the Crown's continual failure to uphold its commitments, as enshrined in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, to acting to the fullest extent practicable to achieve equitable health outcomes for Māori. So why is all this harmful targeting allowed to continue? Well, current regulation has struggled to keep pace with the rapidly evolving digital environment. In New Zealand, responsibility for addressing online harm is spread across multiple agencies and laws, creates gaps and challenges in enforcement. Existing approaches often rely on the platforms and industries reactively responding to the harm rather than proactively preventing it from being advertised. Self-regulation remains the common approach, and it limits the enforcement of existing guidelines. It also means that companies can continue to benefit from harmful advertising, while the responsibility is often placed on the children, the parents, and the communities to manage exposure. Additionally, age restrictions and platform controls are insufficient and cannot reliably prevent young people from being exposed to inappropriate content. Industries maintain the status quo through lobbying and political influence to resist stronger regulation and shaping the consumer preferences and normalising these harmful products. In March of this year, an inquiry was made by the committee. Its focus by the government. Its focus was on the harm that young New Zealanders encounter online and the roles that government should play in addressing these harms. One of the harms highlighted was the online advertising of alcohol, tobacco and gambling. The recommendations from this committee included the introduction of a responsive national agency with appropriate enforcement power whose focus would be on restricting online advertising for the mentioned commodities to young people. The recommendation also advised that young people should be involved with the design of these interventions, which brings us to the creation of our campaign.
Kia ora, ko tia te toko ingoa. So our intervention, introducing Kaitiaki Mātahiko, a youth-led national advocacy and research network campaigning for establishment of an independent digital advertising harm authority. This is to ensure the protection of rangatahi from targeted digital advertising online. Overall, the aim is to create digital environments for rangatahi by 1. Building a credible youth-led evidence database on exposure to harmful digital advertising, and 2. Mobilizing public and political attention through storytelling and media pressure in order to propose a clear regulatory solution, which is the Independent Digital Advertising Harm Authority. Our intervention is youth-led, despite younger people being one of the primary targets of the algorithmic advertising systems. Policy discussions around online harm typically are dominated by government agencies, technological companies, and adult stakeholders. Kaitiaki Mātahiko addresses this gap by placing rangatahi and their lived experiences at the centre of the campaign. The approach is strongly supported within New Zealand. Young people must be part of this conversation. Their perspectives are essential in shaping solutions that are both effective and respectful to their rights. Additionally, there is a strong precedent for successful youth advocacy in Aotearoa, including movements like Generation Zero, which demonstrate the youth-led organising can influence national policy discussions. Our campaign has 2 wings. Research. Research is at the forefront in understanding the youth base. Kaupapa Māori principles will be incorporated throughout our research to ensure it is equitable and culturally responsive. We want to make sure that the research is relevant to our Māori and Pacific populations. Kopapa Māori approaches prioritize tino rangatiratanga and positions rangatahi Māori as active decision makers in both the design of the research and development of solutions. Much of their research in the online space is currently conducted in the United States and Europe, which is certainly very homogenized, white, upper middle class population. Therefore, it is important to have a diverse research outcome from New Zealand. This would put further pressure to the politicians and MPs to realize the gravity of the harm of online advertisement and inequities. This research will be conducted using collaborators such as in tertiary institutes like University of Auckland, national agencies to strengthen the population of our studies. The second wing is the advocacy wing. Public and political attention through storytelling and media pressure is important. This will be done through community outreach, using for youth recruitment through youth local chapters at kuras, marais, university clubs, expos, advertising on social media, and getting interest from the youth about the initiative and understanding their sentiment about the Independent Digital Advertising Harm Authority. We would also have youth training programs that would be mentoring opportunities, leadership trainings, and furthering their involvement into the cause. We would also like to engage with the media to increase public focus of targeted advertising at youth, providing media training to rangatahi ambassadors to share their lived experiences. We would like to also coordinate peaceful demonstrations, petitions, and public campaigns to create political pressure and increase visibility of the issue. Many existing NGOs champion these same ideas. As part of being a greater momentum towards the petition for change, we hope to act as a nexus for collaboration, bringing together these groups with the shared incentive of supporting our youth teams in their campaigning.
What would these be groups? Well, some of them are listed up here, but like any campaign, we can expect there to be supporters and opponents to this. The ones listed up here are groups that have stated goals to enforce the existing regulations or to develop further legislation to protect against harmful digital marketing practices. We mentioned earlier Generation Zero. It's a successful youth agency advocacy organisation. They could be valuable partners for realistic insights in how they're run and how we can make a difference at a political level. Currently there's a high degree of political interest around social media there, both in New Zealand and overseas. Similar to the response to those propositions, we'd expect there to be a mix of bipartisan and minority majority party support or opposition for this campaign. The companies themselves would almost certainly fall into the opposition category. They stand to lose a large amount of profits, as evidenced by those figures up there. However, it's important to consider the economic gain of this advertising against the harm of the products that they are advertising. Given our emphasis on communication, organisation and continued monitoring in this space, the primary focus of our budget up here is establishing a small full-time team who can maintain and sustain our work efficiently. So we build momentum with the expectation that they'll also be able to arrange further collaboration and charitable support, potential grants to sustain the campaign after its primary 2 years. Alongside this are allocations for consultation conferences, infrastructure such as training, regional chapters, research monitoring, media presence and advertising for us as well, obviously.
Our campaign is guided by both Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion and Te Pai Mautanga, which together provide a complementary public health and Haora Māori links. At a systems level, the campaign focuses on healthy policy and promotes creating supportive environments in Waira by advocating for stronger regulation to improve the safety of online spaces for rangatahi. Through a youth-led network, the intervention strengthens community action and ngā mano kura by enabling youth and Māori leadership in advocacy, governance and public narrative change. The campaign also develops personal skills in te oranga by building rangatahi's capacity in advocacy, media engagement, while addressing inequities in digital exposure. Finally, it contributes to reorienting the health systems by shifting the framing of online harm from an individual responsibility to a structural public health issue that requires an upstream prevention and a system-level change. In the first 3 months, we'll establish Kaitiaki Mātihiko by recruiting core members and building our online presence. During the first year, we'll like to grow our membership and train youth leaders to support local chapters and community initiatives. Over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll expand our research program, strengthen partnerships with the allied organisation. Beyond 3 years, we're hoping to lead national advocacy through youth conferences, media engagement, and campaigns for legislative change to implement an independent digital advertising harm authority. If Kaitiaki Mātihiko, together with our allied organisations, can expose the harms of targeted online advertising through research and advocacy, then policymakers face an increased social and political pressure to implement the independent digital advertising harm authority. We would like to use a mixed method evaluation framework for our campaign's effectiveness, process evaluation to monitor implementation, number and diversity of rangatahi that have signed up to the initiative, number of research report produced, and policy briefs presented. Impact evaluation would be assessing changes in youth opinion about digital harm, public support for regulation, policymaker engagement through surveys, interviews, media analysis, and social media analytics. Outcome evaluation would be whether long-term system change have occurred, basically examining how far are we from establishing the independent digital advertising harm authority, and is there an increasing accountability from the tech companies. Throughout, Kaupapa Māori approaches equity-focused monitoring and continuous youth feedback would ensure the campaign remains culturally grounded, accountable, and responsive.
In summation, our hope for this campaign is that there'll be a shift in public narrative from the protection of harmful online advertising being an individual responsibility to corporate accountability. We hope that this will lead to legislative change, ideally the creation of a regulatory body that will enforce the restrictions of targeted advertising of harmful commodities. Altogether, this should result in the reduction of health burden and harm from these commodities, as well as begin to address the inequities present between Māori and non-Māori from. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, there's roughly $9.1 billion of harm from alcohol annually. Some of this likely drastically increases when gambling and other substances are added. For the cost of only $2 million, a significant reduction of this loss would be a great economic cost-benefit ratio. Realistically, we recognise that this campaign could not wipe away all that burden overnight. However, by preventing a large portion of future youth from the exposure and development of these addictive behaviours, a significant portion of this burden could be relieved for the future. Thank you for listening. Any parts of? Oh yeah, sorry, Katie.
I definitely support the idea of including affected groups in your sort of solution and campaign. My concern is that as you identify, they are more vulnerable to this issue because of that critical thinking, maybe deficit, and also, how do we avoid exploiting children who we don't typically kind of use for these roles to avoid child labour?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I see all the points you raise, and certainly the point about the critical thinking and the limbic system, blah, 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 and you don't want to use child labour. The introduction for that is based on a couple of reasons. Partially that report, selective committee report, which highlighted that due to their submissions, the youth that were submitting were saying they wanted to be involved. They didn't want to have changes happen without their input because they didn't think it would be quite as good. Recently as well, as in released yesterday, I believe, there was another report about the getting comments about the... Yeah,
there was a Children's Well Commissioner report that published, which was very ill-timed yesterday, about youth opinions about digital harm in this space overall, not about online advertising specifically, but it talked about how youth want to be involved with this and don't think an over-blanket ban would be a solution to this because it doesn't hold the technological companies accountable. So there are a lot of people who would like to be involved, and that's the other reason we've also increased the age bracket to university students as well to do most of the groundwork and potentially talking to our young rangatahi for information and research and seeing, I think, how they want to be involved in the initiative.
I think that's really fair, Katie, as well. Sorry. I've never needed a mic before. I think that's really fair in terms of there's a balance between we want to make sure that kids are involved and they come along with that policy change, and also that you're not kind of, I guess, doing it in a tokenistic or in an ineffective way, and that, you're not just kind of, there's an element of burnout and just wanting to protect them, because we are the whole point of this is they're a vulnerable group and they are being exploited by other people, so you don't want to make sure that that's not a part of our solution. But I do think from everything we've read or the agencies we've talked to is that there's a lot of talking about kids and what we should do for kids, and it's quite paternalistic. So I think you want to include them in our solution, and there's lots of stuff we can do in terms of our monitoring and evaluation for this initiative to make sure that it is being done in a productive way. Kids that, everyone is included, there's a diversity of voices, and that they are actually being championed, it's reflective of their opinions. But I think it is fair because, if you are dealing with kids, you need to make sure that they're protective and that this is an empowering and a leadership and an opportunity for them. But yeah, that was my opinion.
I was just wondering what was in it for, you talked about youth ambassadors. What's in it? Is there some sort of, what would you consider, what would you propose to the youth ambassadors as a benefit for them to getting involved? Just thinking about, for instance, reciprocity for the people, the youth who might be involved.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, always do it for the LinkedIn. I think as well though, from the reports we read, and I'll pass along to these guys as well, specifically about online advertising, there's a lot of kids that are I'm seeing all this on my phone and I don't like it. I don't like that this is, it feels that it's always coming at me, it's affecting my communities. And I think as well, this isn't all happening on your phone. I think a lot of rangatahi know what alcohol does intergenerationally, and they know what gambling, what that looks like in terms of harms in their community. So I think there's I also think people, we were talking about maybe being under 25, because there's also an element of, maybe we only become less self-involved once you hit 15, 16, and then you start looking out at the world around you, and you actually do have quite a strong political and social justice lens. So I think there's a personal conviction part. There's also a community and a feeling like you're getting stuff done and that you're a part of a wider network. And also there will be things you're being media trained, or you're being upskilled, and you're also being a voice for the people around you. So I think there's a lot of skills individually you could get out of it, and also wider connections and wider kind of political, social change value mahi that you could get back as well.
Have you guys given a lot of thought about the impact an authority like this might have on rangatahi who are involved in an income source through digital media and stuff like that?
I feel we didn't think about that in terms of influencers, but I'll pass it back to you, Charlie. But I feel this is a targeted harm. So yeah.
I think I get your point, and there may be some people that are getting a economic benefit out of it. However, I would probably, in response to that, draw the attention back to the difference between the cost and what. So the companies are getting multiple $1 billion out of it, and also there may be influencers who are getting funds out of it. But is it therefore fair that the New Zealand taxpayers should have to pay upwards of $9.1 billion in accounting for these harmful products? I think looking at that means I don't believe it's quite fair, and I understand that for a few people it may be out of work or a loss of an income, but I don't think that could be weighed up against the cost of harm fairly.
Oh yeah. Did you want to say?
Yeah, just to add on to that. Ultimately, we're talking about restricting the sorts of advertising that is available, but it's not a blanket ban on all advertising. So I think in the very dynamic space of the online community, there's going to be new opportunities that will fill those gaps. As much as we are removing some of what we are deeming harmful advertising, there's always going to be more coming in. And realistically, doing our cost-benefit analysis, the amount of money coming into communities from alcohol advertising, to be fair, is overall, I think, in the 30-odd million range. But really that's a pittance compared to the multiple billions that we're seeing downstream harmful effects from.
Thank you.
Good afternoon all. My name is Dave, and together with my awesome group, we will be presenting on disability, Waikato, and our intervention, Homes for All. Just a note that some of the images you will see have been generated with AI with the sole purpose of visualizing what our interventions will look like. So just a bit into some general background. The United Nations defines disability as an evolving concept. It recognizes that disability isn't solely caused by an impairment itself, but rather by the interaction between a person's impairment and their societal, environmental, or attitudinal barriers that can limit their full participation in society. Looking at the historical context, disability was often viewed negatively, with disabled people seen as less productive members of society. This was reflected in discriminatory laws such as the Imbecile Act of 1882 and the Immigration Restriction Act of 1899, which restricted the entry of disabled people into New Zealand. Economically, disabled people continue to face significant inequities. Employment rates are around half of those of non-disabled people with a 12% pay gap. Socially, disabled people experience higher levels of discrimination. The 2023 General Social Survey found that 38% of disabled adults experience discrimination, compared with 22% of non-disabled adults. In addition, 1 in 3 disabled people report difficulties accessing healthcare services. At a policy level, the Independent Monitoring Mechanism acknowledges that there is limited partnership with disabled people in the development of legislation and services. Current policies also fall short of Te Tiriti o Waitangi principles of self-determination, Article 2, and equity, Article 3, with tangata Waikato Māori continuing to experience greater unmet healthcare needs. For our presentation, we focused on housing accessibility. This refers to how safely and independently people can use their homes in everyday life. Poor housing accessibility is associated with a higher risk of falls, greater social isolation, reduced independence, poorer quality of life, and worse mental health. Now, several gaps contribute to this issue. Disabled people often have to navigate multiple agencies to find suitable housing, creating systemic barriers and long wait times. There is also a significant shortage of fully accessible public housing. In the private housing market, limited accessible options, financial constraints, and landlord discrimination further restrict access. The table below highlights these disparities. Rates of uninhabitable housing are much higher among disabled people, with the rates being even higher for tangata Waikato Māori and disabled Pacific people, demonstrating a disproportionate burden of housing deprivation. So why are we focusing on this issue? There are 2 major challenges facing disabled people when it comes to housing. First, there is simply not enough accessible housing available in Aotearoa. Second, even when accessible homes do exist, they are often not clearly identified and can be difficult to find without support from an agency. Together, these barriers make it much harder for disabled people to find suitable housing. The shortage of accessible housing is significant. Around 17% of New Zealanders are disabled, and disabled people make up nearly 14% of public housing tenants. Yet the previous requirement for Kāinga Ora to provide 15% of accessible homes has been reduced to a mere 3%. There are already successful examples of housing accessibility rating systems in New Zealand and overseas. Organisations such as LifeMark in New Zealand, Livable Housing in Australia, Housing Choices in the United States classify homes according to accessibility features. However, these systems often rely on voluntary assessments and manual matching processes, making the search slower and less independent for disabled people. Different models can help us understand this connection better. The social model of disability highlights that what makes a disability of a person disabled is not the individual themselves, but what they experience from society around them. Living in an inaccessible home that is ill-suited to one's needs is a fundamental failure of society to accommodate for human diversity. The Te Wharitapawha model also helps to reinforce the broader implications of inaccessible housing on well-being. Moving around from inadequate house to inadequate house disrupts a Waikaha's whenua, their roots, as well as their physical well-being and community, leading to social isolation. Our campaign will be called Homes for All. This name embodies our value that everyone deserves access to homes that suit their individual needs. Inspired by the incredible agencies we met over the week, our underlying motivation is to promote the independence and self-determination of disabled people. Our solution is to implement a disabled people-led nationwide standardized coding system to make identifying a home fitting the specific needs for all disabled individuals, regardless of their needs, an easier and mana-enhancing process.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Hassan, I'll be following on. So, as far as our campaign objectives, what would this campaign look like? So as Dave just said, we want a nationwide standardized coding. And here, homes would be assessed using clear criteria with different accessibility levels and extra tags for specific needs. And importantly, at the center, we want to make sure that it's led by disabled people. So that means from inception, we're listening to what tangata whaikaha actually want from accessible housing. And then during production, a panel of stakeholders from a variety of trusted organizations would help lead the criteria development. And these organizations would also collect from their own communities so that the system reflects a wide range of lived experience. In the maintenance phase, the users themselves would continue to give feedback on whether they feel like the listings were accurate, and then audits could be completed by teams that include disabled people. And finally, this would all sit on an accessible, centralized web page where people can filter homes based on their needs. So for our specific objectives, like we just said, we want a nationwide standardized coding that would start with government housing. So we feel like that it would be more feasible for implementation. And then the long-term goal would be making it required across all the wider housing market. Second, we would want to create a mana-enhancing process for independent home searching. So with clearer coding and filters, this allows disabled people and their whānau and carers to search based on their own needs. Also, having direct user feedback would help keep the system grounded in lived experience. Finally, the campaign would help highlight gaps in accessible housing. By using consistent codes, we can measure what levels of accessibility are actually available in Aotearoa, where these shortages are, and then therefore generate evidence to support advocacy for a better supply of accessible homes. So as far as some target groups and allies, our thinking was informed by conversations with disability-led and other organizations, including My Life, My Voice, SAMS, Whangarei Accessible Housing Trust, and Health New Zealand. So first, as we said before, the center of our campaign will be led by tangata whaikaha themselves. And we will also work with local councils as they could help pilot the accessibility criteria in a more defined region. Regional partnerships, for example here, the Waikato Housing Initiative can help us expand our project to other relevant organizations. Partnering with groups such as Waikato Tānui and other iwi housing providers allows the campaign to be more responsive to local communities. And we also need some housing and accessibility expertise. So as Dave talked about with LifeMark, they can actually contribute to our standardized accessibility criteria since they already have some experience in this space. While housing and rental providers would also be needed to make the codes visible and searching in their own listing. And some of the, at the national level, so some of the agencies that are listed up there, they'd all be important for policy support, funding, and future scale up of our campaign. So we've identified some potential barriers that will be needed to overcome for this campaign to be effective. So as we previously discussed with Kāinga Ora, the government is currently more focused on budget reduction when it comes to social housing. This means that there could be some pushback from the central government for our idea. However, our plan doesn't really involve any major additional costs for social housing providers, as we're only requesting that they include our criteria that we develop. And ultimately, with tangata whaikaha and local organizations at the center, we hope we can drive a more grassroots campaign where we can bring their voices to the forefront of policy making over time. We're also unable to initially mandate our criteria to the private housing sector. And while initially we will encourage the private providers to take part, eventually we aim to develop our collaboration with the government so that these criteria become standard across all housing in a similar fashion to how the Healthy Homes Act was rolled out. And digital exclusion is also another barrier that we need to consider. So some disabled people may struggle to access web pages that lack an accessible design. So we hope to collaborate with disabled people and groups such as New Zealand Relay to incorporate an accessible design and have their principles into our platform and make it suitable for any visitor. We also want to ensure there's accurate translations in both Te Reo Māori and also New Zealand Sign Language. So our campaign messages, we have two simple ones. One, accessible homes, inclusive lives, and two, no te mana, which roughly translates to the power is within you, with the overall objective of creating a mana-enhancing journey to find your home.
Alright, hi, I'm Quinn. Moving on to the last little bit of our presentation. So, in terms of our strategies, as mentioned before, our scope will initially be small scale, starting out with public housing to make it easier to implement. To form our benchmarks, we will reach out to disability organisations and work with them to get information from their communities about what that is to them when it comes to an accessible home. Based on these discussions with different communities, we will develop a tiering system based on the level of accessibility for different types of disability. To ensure compliance with our coding system, we will work with organisations such as SAMS to physically audit properties. An approval badge will show properties that have been audited to be what they say they are. We will also use feedback from lived experience by listening to tenant feedback when that coding isn't quite right. We will also have regular meetings with our panel to discuss any improvements or changes and the impacts of them. As discussed before, we will also improve accessibility searching by creating a website that becomes the home for our system. Here is an example of that website with the features we have mentioned, like different accessibility categories and tiers, and also a method of feedback. It will also use accessibility tools such as text-to-speech, New Zealand Sign Language, and multiple language options. Searches can be made with disability profiles or by multiple accessibility options for more advanced searching to different needs. In terms of our timeline for our project, we will start by developing and implementing our coding system and then working with organisations to audit them. Our initial plan and budget is a pilot 2-year program with future funding coming from the government level based on feasibility and effectiveness. We are confident that we would get funding if these are met, given recent push from New Zealand disability organisations and similar budgeting and housing plan changes in Australia in this area. We will monitor for both quality and improvements through our feedback, auditing, and stakeholder meeting inputs. Doing this will make sure the coding is reliable and reflects true need. To evaluate the accessibility space, we will work with our community organisations to survey communities about the state of accessible housing at different stages throughout our campaign to test effectiveness. We will also have property data according to the coding at the end of the 2 years, which we could use to find gaps with future legislation and consideration for entry into private markets. To take a look at our budget, most of it, just over 50%, is set aside for auditing costs by paying partial salaries of pre-existing organisations and adding it to their workload, which is cheaper than paying a full-time employee in that area. Other sections include administration, including an operations manager, to make sure that there are people behind the project, money for the organisations helping to develop the coding, and other maintenance costs such as maintaining the website. But what impact will our project actually have? The biggest is with housing. For the future, we will have data formed to show demand for houses of certain accessibility criteria, gaps in the housing market, and who is most affected by those gaps. This will do a couple of things. It will drive incentive for the housing market and stakeholders to invest in those gaps, and it will give stronger ground for lobbying policy changes to address housing inequities facing disability communities. Downstream, this will have the impact of creating housing that has basic foundations which are inclusive and accessible for all members of society. The other things this will do, it will have an impact on health. The coding gives tangata whaikaha efficient, autonomous, and mana-enhancing strategies to find suitable housing for them instead of telling who where to go when. It will lead to a greater number of people living in a warm, dry home that's suitable for them, therefore improving quality of life and the other metrics we talked about earlier. Finally, we will also have an impact on equity. For one, Māori face a combination of disproportionate housing struggle and disability burden. Improving this issue helps disability communities while also having a broader impact for Māori as a result. We will also work with community organisations and iwi to help tailor our project to certain communities rather than having a vague, overarching approach that isn't really effective for everyone. These are our references.
You guys talk about auditing government-owned social housing, but you identify the government as like a potential opposition to your proposal, and I was wondering how, as an independent agency, you want to like build that relationship so you'll be able to deliver your initiative, which I think is really, really cool. Like, is it just starting with Kainga Ora and like social housing that's available to disabled people, or you want to start in the private sector? I wasn't quite
like
sure.
our initial plan to make it easier is to like kind of work with Kainga Ora and other public housing groups in certain areas, like what was it? Waikato Housing Trust? Yeah, one like smaller groups in different areas, make it easier than like working with Kainga Ora. But definitely having in the public housing, I think we'd be able to work with them easier than the private market. Definitely.
Do you think the government would be get them on side?
I think we could. There's definitely a bit of both.
There is the role of the government to ensure affordable and accessible housing for our disabled people. So the overall vision is the same. So I think there would be. Yeah.
I guess as Sarah mentioned, like we're not asking them to help pay for developing the coding. We're kind of having the cost of that, and then just asking them to have it present.
Yeah, if I could also just jump in as well, like our homes, the Ministry of Disabled People recently put out like a new recent campaign, and a lot of their targets are kind of aligned with this project as well. They kind of want to do a bit more data matching between social homes and disabled people looking for homes, and so ours can kind of supplement their criteria that is already existing, and if we're covering the cost in that way, we're basically providing a service that aligns with goals that they're already going for, and so we feel like there's room to align.
Just to echo what Hassan was saying, it was a New Zealand 2026 to 2030 housing disability strategy that's just come out.
Sorry.
I don't have much to say, but essentially it agrees their second objective is to improve data matching between social housing in New Zealand and social accommodation. And so our campaign essentially allows the drive for it to happen. So we did look at that strategy which came out just this year, but it's the New Zealand Housing Strategy 2026 to 2030.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm just kind of mulling over the idea. It seems to me that your campaign is obviously enabling people with disabilities to actually understand where their housing opportunities lie. But I'm just wondering if there was any thought around some of the discrimination and prejudices that landlords might have actually renting out to people with disabilities. And also my other thought was, do you anticipate from this, I guess, highlighting what homes are available, how do you see that driving more homes becoming accessible? Like, for example, landlords or Kainga Ora actually retrofitting some of the homes to support people to live comfortably in a home or in a house.
I guess part of that is like what we were talking about eventually having it similar to how healthy homes became part of law, and all rental properties were invited to it. Like there will always be pushback from landlords who pay money to make a house more accessible, but if we can eventually roll it out to be legislation, we can have a choice.
I guess to add to that, if we can reach that point where it is nationalised and standardised, then that way we have something that we can measure against and actually directly research where the deficits are. And so that would hopefully help research drive people to see that there actually are like these objective deficits and highlight these inequities more clearly.
And I wanted to add on, I think our main objective at the end is to create a universal design and it's like, I guess maybe there might be some discrimination or pushback, but when we rephrase things and we give them a different perspective that, you know, elderly people also have trouble. You yourself might have trouble in future. Your parents might have trouble looking for properties that might suit them. Then it feels like everybody gets to benefit from this. So I think overall the net benefit is it's for the whole society, and that helps people reframe the idea and reduce that discrimination that people might have.
So we came in with your slide. I got like 15 photos of them all in front of your presentation.
Give you a line test with the 58. Check, 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 check. SM58, no on or off switch. Check, 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 check. One, two, one, two.
Water Health New Zealand Waikato's network. By logging into this computer. Information security policy. Te Whatu Ora, healthcare planned nationally, delivered regionally and tailored locally. Oral health in Aotearoa, inspiring better attitudes and healthier smiles.
Yeah, I have a Mac too. Honest? I gave them the mic. I was like, if you want to ask questions, where's the actual question? Oh, you already know. When do I start? Yeah. No, happy to. Yeah, I can start. Kia ora, I'm Ariki. When I was 4 years old, I lost my 4 front teeth under general anesthetic. My parents would not give the knowledge or support to protect my oral health. They had poor health literacy and education. Back then, nurses told parents to give their kids Ribena because it contained vitamin C. So my parents did, unable to critically think about the sugar content and the possibility of healthcare professionals not always being right. The consequences were more than cosmetic. It affected what I ate, it affected my confidence, my speech, and in turn my development. I'm not the exception, but one of thousands. The answer isn't louder warnings on juice boxes or more pamphlets in waiting rooms. It's changing the environment that shapes what whānau can access, afford, and choose. Today, we're presenting From Sugar to Smiles, a community-led campaign to build public and political momentum for a sugar levy in Aotearoa, starting where the need is greatest, Te Tai Tukaro, Northland. Tooth decay is one of the most common causes of chronic disease in Aotearoa, affecting around 320,000 adults and 31,000 children requiring treatment. It is linked to many poor health outcomes such as decay, abscess, and serious conditions such as cellulitis, dental sepsis, and brain abscess. Despite Aotearoa providing free dental coverage between the ages of 0 and 18 years, inequities persist between ethnicities, most notably in childhood and early childhood, with 1 in 10 children under 14 having teeth removed due to the above reasons. Children carry a higher burden of disease and are more likely to develop the poorer health outcomes mentioned previously. A combination of mouth bacteria, dietary sugars, and insufficient oral hygiene often causes tooth decay, as was the case with me, all of which are strongly influenced by upstream factors such as socioeconomic status, education, structural policies, physical environment such as access to fluoridation and dental care, food systems meaning limited local supermarkets, thus relying on convenience stores, dairies, and fast food restaurants. Māori Pacific children and children living in the most deprived areas, such as Northland, have disproportionately higher rates of decayed, missing, and filled teeth. They also have disproportionately lower access to and uptake of oral health services between the ages of 0 and 5, and have one of the longest waiting lists for general anesthetic dental procedures for complications of untreated caries. By age 5, preschoolers usually have 5 decayed teeth, and only 40% are seen by then, often with preventable complications. But between 2 and 3 years old, this is where they are not being seen. So why is this all important?
Kia ora everyone, I'm Rosa. So our rationale draws from already existing sugar legislation overseas. The UK has a levy based on sugar density, which has led to many drinks being reformulated to have less sugar and avoid the tax. In Australia, beverages have less sugar overall than New Zealand due to the Australian Beverage Council's sugar reduction pledge. In Mexico, there is a volume-based sugar tax, and in South Africa, there is a density-based sugar levy. All of these examples have been successful and have shown that levies are effective in reducing consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. They also have the additional bonus of encouraging manufacturers to reformulate drinks to reduce sugar content. On the other hand, Aotearoa does not currently have any sugar levies or taxes. We also have significantly higher levels of sugar in carbonated beverages than our Commonwealth and other first world counterparts. While water fluoridation has been introduced, it has not yet been extensively integrated across the motu. As well as this, current government initiatives are limited to restrict. And so, rather than focusing on changing individual behaviour, our campaign aims to change the systems that shape behaviour. By the end of the project timeline, Te Tai Tokoro will be able to provide a nationally transferable model for creating sugar-free environments and building public and political support for broader policy action. And so, for the specific objectives of our campaign and what success looks like for us, we've broken our campaign objectives down into influence on the public, influence on policymakers, and influence on companies. In terms of the public, we want to use our campaign to increase public support for a sugar levy and for its revenue to be reinvested into oral health prevention strategies. The media campaign will include messages that aim to make the public aware of corporations' responsibility for the sugar in our drinks, and also show the public the types of initiatives that revenue from a sugar tax could be used for, such as mobile dental vans or mouthwash in schools. We want to specifically see this through focus groups into Tai Tokoro, conducted before and after the campaign to measure these shifting attitudes. Next, we want to influence policy. If successful, we will have established a Northland-based coalition that can continue to advocate beyond the project and will outlive the $2 million investment. We want Northland to be a strong model for the rest of the country, since they are the area with the highest need, and ensuring it works there means it will likely work everywhere in an equitable way. Finally, the campaign also emphasises corporate responsibility. We want our campaign to put the onus on companies like Coca-Cola and encourage them to reformulate their drinks with less sugar. And if we achieve these objectives, they should also reinforce one another to strengthen our campaign. So, who are our target groups? This campaign deliberately doesn't target patients, parents, or children. We want to move away from downstream behavioural lecturing. If telling people to brush their teeth and stop drinking fizzy worked, we wouldn't have thousands of tamariki waiting on hospital surgical lists for full dental instructions. So it's worth separating the two things, who we're targeting and who benefits. Our targets are the decision makers who can change the system. The primary target groups are the legislative and policy decision makers with the authority to act on a levy. Our secondary targets are the Northland school boards and local councils who hold the immediate authority to change the food environment around those whānau. Our beneficiaries are different. They're the people the change is for, which is the tamariki, Māori and Pacific communities, and low-income whānau into Tai Tokoro. And that's where we're focusing. Because our funding is capped at $2 million, we cannot run an effective campaign across Aotearoa simultaneously. Instead, we are tightly focusing our resources on a single high-need region, Northland. Starting in Northland is our proof of concept, and if the model works there, it can work anywhere. And so some of our allies include NZDA, NZ Oral Health Association, Te Ao Marama, Health Coalition Aotearoa, Dental for All, Health and Disability Advocacy Service, and FIS. But because we are concentrating our budget specifically in Northland, our most critical allies are the local networks, iwi, regional public health units, schools, and the parents and whānau themselves. These are the groups who will act as local champions and partake in our focus groups. Our opposition includes the current coalition government, who prioritises deregulation, free market ideologies, and opposes national fiscal levies, and the food and beverage industry, which includes corporate manufacturers and powerful lobby groups. New Zealand culture defaults to a narrative of personal responsibility. When a child has rampant tooth decay, society is quick to blame the parents for buying juice or fizzy drinks, rather than blaming a system that allows sugar to be cheaper and more accessible than milk.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Kaj. So I'm just going to now introduce our campaign. So our slogan, as Ariki said, is From Sugar to Smiles. We chose it because it captures the journey that we want, from sugar-related harm to healthier smiles. It frames the levy not as a tax, but as a path to better oral health. The revenue from sugary drinks is reinvested in the communities that would need it most. It's positive and future-focused. It shifts attention from towards what is gained, which is healthier smiles and better well-being. It's simple and hopefully it's memorable for everyone we need to reach, which is our parents, schools, health professionals, and policymakers, which is exactly what a public health campaign will need. Now on to strategies. So this slide maps out our campaign onto the Ottawa Charter framework. The model breaks down into 3 strategies that describe how you promote health, which is enable, advocate, and mediate. First is enable. We enable by creating supportive environments. Forming the coalition builds the structure and settings that support and mobilize change. Coalition is cross-sector, so it's iwi-led alliance of oral health and advocacy organisations like Rosa mentioned before, NZDA. The focus groups open up public discussion and draw in attitudes. The media campaign, which is our main lever, shifts the commercial and social norms around sugar rather than telling individuals that they need to cut down on it. Next, we have advocate, which is by strengthening community action. That iwi-led coalition mobilises communities to act in their own interests. Together, we build public and political support for a sugar levy with the revenue reinvested into oral health, exactly as our From Sugar to Smiles slogan promises. That's the change we are working towards. Thirdly, mediate. So we mediate by developing personal skills, not the public's, but our advocates. We mediate between the public, industry, and the government, training and resourcing local advocates, especially our iwi, to lead the conversation alongside our allies like FIS, NZDA, etc., and amplifying those voices through the media campaign with a social media focus like very well-known TikTok. On to our timeline. So our timeline is built on the 5 conditions of collective impact, and it splits into 2 parts. A focused 3-year funded project and a look ahead to what comes after. The 2 million funds are from years 1 to 3, which is from 2026 to 2028. So now I'm breaking down into year 1, which is 2026, aka the groundwork. We establish the iwi-led coalition, align our allies around a common agenda, and run the baseline surveys, getting a gauge of what the public already thinks. 2027 rolls out a 2-pronged media campaign, shifting responsibility to the industry and spotlighting community champions of sugar-free environments with continuous communication to keep everyone aligned. 2028 is about mobilizing and backing existing efforts and building momentum through focus groups and our coalition meetings. Now from 2029 onwards, this is beyond the funded project, what the coalition carries on and what further investment could unlock. Here we review the impact through post-surveys. So this is taking surveys after the campaign has ended of the same focus groups, comparing it to our baseline surveys. And an equity analysis as well. It's important to then hand over the work to the coalition to keep advocating and scale the model nationwide beyond Te Tai Tokoro. The aim is to secure enough public and political support to put a sugar levy with its revenue reinvested into oral health firmly onto the table.
So in terms of monitoring and evaluation, our evaluation tracks 2 things: how well the campaign is delivered and what it changes. Now, process measures tell us whether we're delivering effectively, the coalition partners we recruit, the meetings we hold, our campaign reach across social media and community events, and our advocacy activity with policymakers. In terms of our outcomes, our primary measure is the shift in public attitudes. So our plan is to run surveys and focus groups in Te Tai Tokoro before and after, with year 1 as our baseline, measuring awareness of the industry's role in the sugar in our drinks and public support for a levy and government action. We'll also track a leading behavioral signal, which is the self-reported consumption and regional sales volume, since reduced volume is what overseas levies have shifted. Importantly, we'll separate the results to check the shift is happening equitably for Māori, Pacific, and low-income whānau, not just on average. And success looks like a stronger stakeholder engagement and higher public support, aka the momentum that promotes a sugar levy with revenue reinvested into oral health. Now, in terms of our budget, so this pie chart here shows how we plan to allocate our $2 million investment across the 3-year project. It breaks it into 3 areas: our coalition, the media campaign, and evaluation. Now, one of the largest shares goes into our coalition at about 43%. That's $570,000 for the backbone team, including a project coordinator, policy advisor, and a Northland community organizer. A further $290,000 for coalition activities, so partner honoraria, regular hui, and the advocacy that keeps pressure on government and the beverage industry. Now, close behind this is the media campaign, and we've allocated $530,000 for the media buy and broadcasting, social media, radio, billboards, and online video, all targeted to Northland, and $300,000 for agency fees and creative production to bring the campaign to life in both English and Te Reo Māori. Now, this is the spend that shifts responsibility onto industry and builds public support for a levy. The remaining 15.5% covers our monitoring and evaluation work, with about $180,000 for the surveys and focus groups, and $130,000 for independent reporting that will tell us whether the campaign is actually shifting public attitudes and how equitable outcomes are. Overall, our $2 million goes towards a coordinated 3-year push to build public will, political pressure, and the evidence base needed to make a sugar levy in New Zealand a reality. Now finally, in terms of our expected outcomes relate to what we would eventually achieve through a sugar levy. Now, a sugar levy helps shift responsibility upstream, encouraging manufacturers to reduce sugar content and making healthier choices easier for families. Rather than blaming parents or children, it changes the system that shapes those choices in the first place, helping prevent other children from experiencing avoidable harm. Downstream, we hope a sugar levy will narrow the price gap between unhealthy and healthy foods and help prevent cost and marketing from dictating food choices. It can also change public attitudes towards sugar by increasing awareness of its health impacts and signaling that excessive sugar consumption is a public health issue rather than simply a matter of personal responsibility. Over time, this can help make high sugar products less socially normal and increase consumer demand for healthier alternatives. Tooth decay is not simply the result of poor individual choices, it is the predictable outcome of an environment where high sugar products are cheap, heavily marketed, and often presented as normal or even healthy. Thanks for listening, and thank you to everyone who helped with this presentation.
Well done. That was really awesome. I think obviously things like Coca-Cola and Pepsi have billions and billions of dollars, and you have 2 million, which is an obvious challenge. What do you feel the strengths are of your campaign to sort of come up against these huge global players?
The question was about the fact that we have a massive opposition against billions and billions of dollars having Coca-Cola, and what do you think our strengths for our campaign might be? I think the important thing to consider is the fact that there's been continuous efforts made by our allies like NZDA. Oh, sorry.
There's already continuous efforts that's been for many years that have shown the efforts from our allies like NZDA, and there's already policy drafts. And I think that the effect of our campaign with the $2 million, like you said, that's why we wanted to start concentrated. There's a lot of effort and good mahi being done in Northland, and essentially our campaign's meant to try to pull everything together and start creating a catalyst for actual movement. That's why we are mediating against towards government, public, and the industries. So, in order to have a massive change, you need to have both public pressure. So it's not about educating the public about oral health, but the fact that we need to actually hold these industries accountable. And I think that is one of the things that we want to, it's really about the long-term change. Yeah. Any other questions?
Kind of what Katie was saying, I feel like this topic has been on the policy agenda for the past 10 years. It's been a discussion. And I was wondering if you guys had research or you had opinions about, why do you think it's taking so long? Why do you think it's a conversation we keep having and not getting it over the line? And I guess, how do you think you respond to that?
I think that's a great question. It has taken a long time. We're not the only ones that it has taken a long time for, though. UK is another example of that. They introduced the idea of a levy ages ago, and it only got across in 2018. So they haven't even reviewed their 10-year outcomes, but they've already started kind of analysing outcomes already, and it's kind of showing that across the board, not only in the UK, but also in there's 120 different countries that have levies or taxes, that it has been effective. And I think although obviously not everything is directly applicable to New Zealand, the largest piece of evidence is across the board, no matter all 4 of those examples prove that there's reduced sugar consumption in those low socioeconomic areas. And although there's not a lot of good evidence about, there's not many great examples that are directly applicable to our Indigenous population, but it still follows kind of the expected change. So I guess the best way to kind of
illustrate that South Africa is a great example, because not only did their levy introduce that manufacturer change where a lot of companies have just come in right under the margin so that they don't have to pay the tax. So if you look at a graph, there's a massive spike at 0% sugar, right, because that's your sugar-free alternatives, and then there's another massive spike right under where the tax comes in. But the other thing that's evident is that it also reduced the volume being purchased, which is a good indicator of consumer behaviour. So people are actually making a conscious decision, because the announcement of all these levies has kind of brought attention to the fact that people are choosing better choices, making better choices.
Just to add to that, regarding the campaign, I think it's important to add that in Mexico, it actually was funded through philanthropic funding at first, before it actually became a national massive change. So I think the fact that we try to do this with this philanthropic funding, with $2 million, that's an actual national example that it's possible. So please give us money. Thank you.
I think the big companies have done it before, they can do it here, you know?
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Ka mihi ki te iwi kāinga. Waikato tainui me te kuini ngā wai hono i te pō, tēnā koutou. Ki ngā hāpari o Waikato, tēnei te mihi ki a koe. Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Blaze, and our topic is food insecurity, with the title Te Waka Kai Ora. Focusing on kai redistribution for empowering the tangata whenua of Aotearoa. Thank you to all of the people and agencies who have given us their time this week. I was 7 years old when I witnessed food insecurity for the first time. A boy in my class was given a Marmite sandwich by our teacher every day. With this, he'd eat half for lunch and he'd take half home to his dad. So why is food insecurity such an issue in Aotearoa? This experience is not uncommon for people in Aotearoa, with 1 in 3 households experiencing some form of food insecurity. Specifically in Waikato, the region produces 23 times the amount of food needed to feed the population. But in 2025, we had the highest rates of food insecurity in Aotearoa. Food insecurity looks different for different people. It can mean a reduced quantity, quality, or variability of foods, or disrupted eating patterns. Food security is different from food sovereignty, which is having control over kai with the use of sustainable and culturally appropriate agricultural practices. This chart shows that for most whānau experiencing food insecurity, the barriers are things such as embarrassment, not being aware of the food relief services available to them, and transport difficulties. Colonisation is not just the history of Indigenous food insecurity, it is the explanation. Prior to colonisation, Māori established and maintained a kai system that involved traditional food practices such as hunting, fishing, and growing vegetables. Breaches of te tiriti meant confiscation of Māori land, mass deforestation, water pollution, and displacement of Māori into urban centres. Colonisation unravelled kai sovereignty and created a fractured relationship between whānau and kai. This remains today, with 51% of Māori disproportionately experiencing some level of food insecurity. We have identified several upstream barriers to achieving food security. Firstly, there is a cost of living crisis, with a third of Kiwi households finding it difficult to live on their present income. Hunger is a symptom of all other social factors, and often food is the most adaptable expense whānau cut down. Secondly, our food sector is controlled by a duopoly formed by Woolworths Group and Foodstuffs NZ, which stifle competition and command higher prices for the consumers. The distribution of food is not equitable, with rural towns having fewer grocery stores and a higher concentration of fast food outlets. Lastly, the government currently has no food strategy, which is a huge topic, but essentially means no one's job at the table is to protect food security. This allows the duopoly to treat food as a commodity and not a basic right. Our project is going to flip the food system. Currently, the supermarket duopoly is central to our society, and support such as emergency food vouchers can only be used in supermarkets, which feeds into the sector. Our whānau are left on the outside, often feeling whakamā and frustrated by the complex system of food support services. Our project will flip the system and put whānau in the centre by restoring access, dignity and autonomy around healthy kai. Our project provides wraparound support to whānau with our centralised kaupapa-based hub and mobile food trucks. Following this, with our project evaluation, we hope to achieve policy change to create long-term kai sovereignty.
I want to talk now about the core of our strategy. We've established here 3 clear objectives. Our first one, we aim to directly improve access to nutritious food in neighbourhoods of high need right here in the Waikato as a pilot. Secondly, we aren't campaigning on essentially reinventing Uber Eats. We want to build a community distribution network with kaitiaki co-delivery and voluntary education at the same time, ensuring the solution is rooted in local leadership. Thirdly, and our ultimate benchmark, is that we want to achieve macro-level impact. We want to achieve policy change that sustains this long after our $2 million is gone. We aren't looking to temporarily alleviate hunger. We're setting out to prove a regional model in Waikato that can fundamentally reshape how Aotearoa approaches food security from the ground up. To make this work, we've mapped our landscape into target groups. Our target group focuses strictly on whānau in high needs areas with the lowest physical and financial access. With this, we're going to identify through deprivation data and community referrals. Looking at the data, research by Marek et al. In 2021 developed an area-based measure of access to health-promoting and health-constraining environments in New Zealand, which included food. This was called the Goods and Bads Index. Additionally, in 2018, the University of Auckland published an index of multiple deprivation, which I actually saw in one of the previous slides from another group. And while it's a tad outdated, things have changed since 2018, it can be used collectively in aggregate to shape our targeted approaches. On the other hand, we have few allies. These are strong food redistribution philanthropic groups. These include Go Eco, Kaivolution, the New Zealand Food Network, and the Kai Ika Project, also known as the Free Fish Heads Project. Politically, we align with parties pushing for systemic change, like Te Pāti Māori and the Greens. In terms of opposition, again, as with every group has found so far, our main hurdles come from the government, particularly within MPI, here where rigid regulatory barriers protect the existing supermarket duopoly and don't really give much space for community innovation. This brings us to the core concept of our project, Te Waka Kai Ora, kai redistribution for mana motuake. By anchoring our entire operation in mana motuake, we ensure that the way food is distributed honours the dignity of the people receiving it. It respects local Māori leadership and builds a reliable, community-based food ecosystem. To execute this, we've got 3 prongs. Prong 1 focuses entirely on supply in the hub. Our role is to facilitate. We're establishing a centralised community food hub in this pilot by partnering directly with local Waikato marae. In this case, the Kirikiriroa Te Hakao Whare Tonga marae. It's the one on Wairere Drive. Major food rescue suppliers like GoEco, Kiwi Harvest, the kind of people who bring you the odd bunch from Woolies, they will redirect their large-scale surplus to this marae. By utilising this marae, we are using a physical building that is grounded in a culturally secure environment that our target demographic probably already trusts, and additionally is well positioned to support people at scale. Prong 2. We address the critical issue of outreach and access. Great, we've got our food out of marae, but some of the people we're trying to help can't actually get to the marae. So our project is funding mobile trucks, like again, the delivery vans from Pack and Save New World Woolies. These will go out into the community, driven by kaitiaki, trusted familiar faces from the community. We're targeting the specific locations using the deprivation data I talked about before. And this can also involve wraparound services at the same time, like oranga tamariki, domestic violence services, outreach nurses, that sort of thing that we've seen this year in mid-school. What we're aiming to deliver is real food, fresh produce, dairy, quality protein sourced straight from local farms and orchards. We'll also provide ready-made meals for whānau who can't actually cook at home, akin to what Auckland City Mission is doing. Our third prong tackles structural change. We're looking for policy level change here, and we're trying to address upstream drivers of food insecurity. Right now, there is a thing called an MSD emergency food voucher. It's $100 and it can be spent at the duopoly. This is a potential funding source for philanthropic groups. Our goal is to shift it so that policy says that these can be spent more effectively at our community hubs. Simultaneously, we're working with local council to secure cheaper rents and reduced rates for community-led food spaces. We're piloting this entire triple-pronged approach right here in Waikato. Once we gather the regional evidence to prove its viability, our objective is to use that data to advocate for scaling the model nationally. The Food Waka model directly aligns with the Ottawa Charter for health promotion by focusing on healthy public policy and reorienting our services. Our advocacy campaign is structured in distinct phases, the prongs. Initially, we are targeting MPI to lower the regulatory barriers that paralyze community interventions. We're learning from the challenges faced by great initiatives like Maikai. Next, we'll engage local councils for land and funding. We're also going to advocate subsidies for local producers who want to donate food but face financial strain to do so. Finally, once established, we're going to be working on MSD to get some money flowing through as a funding source. Eunice?
Our initiative of bringing nutritious kai directly to areas of higher need with mobile food trucks has actually been tried overseas in Australia and also the US. The evidence all shows that addressing food insecurity is more than just giving people food parcels. It's a combination of access to kai, education, and also community empowerment. So this campaign is actually feasible for us to pilot here in the Waikato. The 3 phases of this timeline will put the campaign into context. I mainly want to highlight the future direction of this campaign, just as Zach said, after the $2 million has been run out. So by phase 2, we want to cut out the middlemen that supply that food surplus and try to get food directly from our local producers into the community. This is a role that will be facilitated by GoEco, which is an organization that shares that same vision as us. By phase 3, community-based work alongside kaitiaki across the motu should have increased kai sovereignty, and policy would be changing underway as well. So this budget here outlines where we will spend our money, and I'll just briefly speak on who we're going to allocate these expenses to. So $400K will go towards program coordination. That's project direction, liaison, and admin, and that's going to be based in the marae. 300K will go directly to our kaitiaki and mentorship stipends, and that's around 3 to 4 part-time kaitiaki per year. 280K will go towards truck purchasing, fittings, and food act compliance costs. Food sourcing and logistics, as I just said, will go towards Go Eco, who will be the ones that will facilitate that coordination between producers and the community. And then 200K is also set aside for independent evaluation with Māori expertise to produce our reports. Evaluation of our impacts and outputs is split according to the campaign objectives. Quantitative objectives would be monitored through our outreach, so monthly numbers that come through, and then qualitative outputs we gain from our huis and also feedback directly from the community. Both combine together to fulfill our final objective, which is the production of the research reports to scale this campaign nationally, if it succeeds. So coming back to the story that Blaze had told in the beginning, that was actually my personal experience growing up here in the Waikato. I was, going to school with this boy, and now 15 years later, when I shared the story with the team, we kind of took that into consideration and kept it in the forefront of our minds and kept whānau at the center of our initiative. So we really believe that this could make a difference for whānau and allow them to have access to healthy, nutritious kai here in the Waikato. Cool. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, opening the floor for any pātai. Thank you. Len? So the question was about whether or not the whānau getting access to the food need to pay. So.
Thank you, it's a good question. We kind of, we've had a bit of a think about this. One of the things we talked about a couple of times and pointed to was MPI's regulatory powers, and a lot of that kicks in once there's money changing hands. So the sort of model for accessing the food might change over the course of the 3 years as our advocacy continues. So in those initial stages, while establishing and working with MPI to show them that we are compliant with their understandable food safety and food safety regulations, we've thought, again, this is also leaving it up to the people running the service, as we are intermediaries, to work out what works. But a koha model initially, and then once we've got to the stage where these MSD food vouchers might be available to sustain and scale the project, at that stage then we operate a bit more like the Auckland mission grocer works, where people are paying as if having the dignity and autonomy to pick which foods they want to use, and pay for them as if it's a traditional supermarket. But because of the way that we're sourcing our food, the prices can be so much lower, and their MSD emergency food voucher can be stretched out a lot further. Thank you for the question.
I think it was mentioned as well as 120 million that the government spent on food vouchers just last year alone. So that's why we're using that as our source and why we're targeting that. Was there another question?
Answered.
I just wondered how you working with other providers in the area who are also, trying to address the food insecurity, like someone mentioned the City Mission or other, Vinnies, those groups. Are you linking with them, or do you see your project as quite different to what they're providing?
Thank you for your question. So just for the online viewers, the question is, how do we fit in with current existing services? And it's a good point, because there are some existing services, but the problem we identified in talking to our stakeholders was that these services exist in uniquely carved out niches, somewhat challenging access to the majority of the population, and they're a bit siloed. And so what we are aiming to do is to bring together these services and bring it under one silo. So our pronged approach that I talked about, the first prong brings together some of those siloed providers. So Go Eco, they do a lot on their own, and they were fantastic to talk to. And if you're listening to this, thank you so much for the chat. But they bring food rescue in, they bring so produce from farms, supermarket kind of end of life type stuff, and then they push it out to different groups like churches, like Salvation Army, and like food banks. What we're aiming to do is to, instead of create a referral-based service, we are creating an outreach service that targets people and brings it to them. And so, yes, it is akin to what exists, but it is meeting a need that is not currently met. Sure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Where do we find our slides?
I think they'll already be on there. Are you happy for me to just use your script?
Yep.
In which case, can we zoom it in a little? 'Cause I
Sure. Do
probably
you want
lost
to
it.
figure out the slides?
Where would I find it?
Can you just sign into Google?
Hmm?
Do you want to just sign into the Google?
Sure. Do I just... Ah, yes.
Yes, just
awesome.
here.
Thank you. Sorry. Oh, PDF. Okay.
Oh, it's PDF. Oh, yeah.
Just check. Oh. Don't go backwards, I guess. Okay.
Oh. That's so weird. Okay.
Oh, okay. E tū pohutakawa, te kaikawe I ngā mate o te tau. Haere rā koutou ki te uma o Ranginui. Hei whetū e te nui a tāne. Koia rā. Kua whetū rangitia, koutou ke aku rau kahurangi.
Tēnā koutou, my name is William Varley. It's my privilege to run you through the first half of our campaign. So New Zealand has an aging rural population. 34% of Māori aged over 65 are living in rural areas, and a quarter of all New Zealanders aged over 65 are living in rural communities. There's increased needs as a result of this. We have a need for more care homes, more primary care, more palliative care, more tertiary and specialist care, and more family support as a result of these shifting demographics. Today we're looking at a stark reality in Aotearoa. Where you live determines how you will die. Palliative care in Aotearoa is severely urban-centric. Rural New Zealanders experience higher mortality rates, a greater burden of disease, shorter life expectancy than their urban counterparts, and yet the health system has not responded with the proportionate investment in rural palliative services. The New Zealand College of GPs identifies the following key areas where there are needs. There's fewer specialist palliative care teams outside of major centres. There's difficulty accessing hospice services. There's a limited rural health workforce in general. There's travel barriers for patients and whānau, and there's delayed referrals to palliative services. Across the world and in other parts of New Zealand, two significant interventions have made progress in removing these inequities. The first is a type of organization called compassionate communities. So compassionate communities are population health movements that focus on involving the community in a shared responsibility for the palliative process. A good example of this is in Rotorua, where there's Te Atawhai Aroha, and they do a whole range of things, but a few of them are organizing community education events around the process of dying, linking communities and services together, and they started a very cool initiative called Nobody Dies Alone, where if you're in Rotorua Hospital and you're dying and there's no one there with you, they'll send a volunteer to be with you in those moments. So that's some of the things they do. The second proven method of reducing these inequities is to train primary healthcare workers in palliative care. That's pretty straightforward. So what's our strategy in approaching these problems? Well, we've taken a two-pronged approach. The first prong is the establishment of a palliative ambassador, a community champion, we're calling them. They're going to create relationships with and between the providers and communities. There'll be someone who is passionate about palliative care. They're going to be sensitive to the needs of the South Waikato region, which is where we are targeting our intervention. And they're going to be someone who has lots of connections in that community. Our second prong is a policy shift in primary care education. We've called this nurturing services. We would like to see a stronger palliative care curriculum for primary healthcare workers. Because of the difficulty of providing specialist palliative care rurally, it's normally the GPs and the district nurses who have to pick up these roles. However, often they have not received the training they need to confidently deal with palliative situations. Our goal with nurturing services is to strengthen the primary care workers to be able to fill this gap in specialist palliative care workers confidently and effectively. Why did we hone in on the South Waikato region? Well, it's got three serious risk factors when it comes to the quality of palliative care. It's rural. The nearest tertiary centres are Hamilton and Rotorua, and they can be 2.5 hours away. It's socio-economically deprived. Around 80% of the population lives at a Q5 DEP level, which, if you remember Popul Health 111, that's the worst level of deprivation. There's a large Māori population. 37% of the population is Māori. Our campaign targets these inequities with a proven focus on primary palliative care and compassionate communities. Emerging evidence suggests that compassionate communities decrease unnecessary healthcare utilization, leading to significant cost savings, and they improve the quality of life and social connectedness in these communities. Our engagement with palliative professionals, all the people that we've spoken with in the last week, they've consistently talked about the value of training our primary care physicians and nurses to be more equipped to deal with palliative situations. The Waikato University is starting a medical program in 2028, and we want to include a module in their new training program for specializing in palliative care. And the Waikato vision fits perfectly with what we want to do because they are focused on training rural GPs and primary care physicians. So prong one, our palliative champion. Our initial objective is to assess the palliative needs of the community. This will be through a consultative process, including HUI, community meetings, talking to patients and services. Then in the long term, we want to create lasting connections between those various groups to pave the way for a compassionate community presence or a similar organization. Eventually, we want to see this rolled out nationwide. Prong two is our primary care education. In the short term, we're going to do a qualitative and quantitative review of the current GP and district nurse training pathways. We want to assess where there is room for improvement and what current palliative training they're planning to include. Then we're going to present a report based on our findings to Waikato University advocating for a dedicated palliative module. And our goal is to have the university include this module in its new medical school program. We've heard lots about the Ottawa Charter, so I won't run over the specifics, but we fit the Ottawa Charter because we want to identify the community needs through our ambassadors' work. We want to upskill our primary care professionals in their palliative care knowledge. We want to advocate for the needs that the community brings to us. We want to create a community culture which is willing and able to care for terminally ill members through close connections between communities and services. And we want to reorient healthcare services towards well-equipped primary care workers who can deal with rural palliative patients. Finally, we want to build compassionate communities and palliative modules into national public health policy.
Thank you, Will. My name is Katie. So now we'll discuss some more of the details of the campaign.
So who is actually affected by our campaign? Obviously, the key players will include the communities within which the interventions are taking place, that is South Waikato. So identifying community leaders, local stakeholders, and others is essential to developing sustainable and appropriate strategies. So to do that, we'll collaborate with local iwi, religious leaders, local council, and existing service providers like Hospice Waikato and the Society of Palliative Medicine, all of whom share the roles of target as well as intervention. The Waikato School of Medicine would also need to commit to engaging with and implementing the palliative care training prong of our campaign. Opposition could arise from current or future governments if their interests centre on short-term economic growth and immediate deliverables rather than long-term stability and health promotion. It may also be challenging to appeal to the general public, for many of whom conversations around death and dying are still considered quite taboo. Additionally, the historic and ongoing colonisation and mistreatment of tangata whenua by healthcare systems could inhibit this relationship-building process with our communities, highlighting the need for integrated involvement from the outset. To roll out, each prong of our campaign follows a three-step roadmap. So for prong 1, championing communities, the first stage involves intensive community consultation across 5 hui, all-day-long hui, to brainstorm solutions, identify the community ambassador or champion, and develop an advisory group. The valuable knowledge gained here can inform not only prong 1, but also prong 2, which I'll discuss shortly. The following 12 months would involve this ambassador actioning recommendations from the hui, bridging the gap between existing palliative services and South Waikato communities, while gathering further wisdom and requests from the communities. They would also have monthly meetings with the advisory group that we established to maintain accountability and transparency between the different stakeholder groups. The final stage would include evaluating the campaign, strategic forward planning, and making informed policy recommendations. For prong 2, or nurturing services, stage 1 looks like forming a research team and an education team. They're not mutually exclusive. Investigating existing palliative education practices locally and elsewhere, and liaising with Waikato School of Medicine throughout that process. That allows us to leverage some of the community solutions that we identified in the hui, as well as options identified in our research to develop a curriculum proposal. Stage 3 then involves implementing that curriculum and then evaluating the development process itself and creating frameworks for long-term review of how well this is actually working. Everyone's favourite topic, the budget. So a significant portion of our budget, as you can see, is allocated to these 5 initial hui. These are instrumental in phase 1 to demonstrate our commitment to ngā manukura and mana whakahaere, community leadership and autonomy, and invest in those relationships. You may also notice that the ambassador's salary includes a generous expense budget as well to account for their travel, as well as to enable some creative relationship building opportunities. You can see that we allocated a significant portion of our budget to the research and development of the curriculum for Waikato Medical School, due to the heavy workload entailed of this, but also the scope to expand it to other agencies like medical colleges, district nursing, paramedicine, and kaiawhina programs. I'll move on, but if you have any questions, we can talk about it in the Q&A. So naturally, we must continuously evaluate our success for each phase and each prong of our campaign. For the first prong, success at stage 1 will look like completing the task that we've set out to do in those first 6 months. But for stage 2, the measures of success would be heavily influenced by the plans we developed during our hui. Suggested metrics could include quantitative audits on service use and semi-regular surveys or focus groups. Stage 3 would then benefit from quantitative and qualitative evaluation, plus the output of some formalised policy recommendations. In prong 2, for the early stage, we would like to see some tangible research outputs that would then bring us into the next stage that can secure a commitment from the Waikato Medical School. This phase would also call for external reporting to assess the quality and efficiency of our teams and maintain accountability. Of course, the actual curriculum rollout would be a success in itself, but staff and student surveys could provide some useful additional insights. At that final stage, frameworks should also be activated to ensure continued monitoring going forward, ideally with some further funding sources secured already. So why does any of this actually matter? Our campaign takes on the work of decolonising solution finding, emboldening rural New Zealanders to collectivise and form a model for future campaigns. Creating lasting relationships between and within communities, current and future service providers and funding bodies will increase access to the appropriate services, meaning rural New Zealanders can live better and die well. More equipped medical workforces will address the changing demographics, with scope for broader application to the other disciplines we discussed. Relationships are at the core of our kaupapa, and we believe that through them we can help to create better, more dignified moments leading to the end of life in rural settings, because there is comfort in community. Whāngai I tō taua tuahine, hei tangi I a taua. Ngā mihi nui. Thank you.
I was wondering why you chose South Waikato as your point of interest other than just being rural, what kind of transferability does that have to other regions?
I guess Waikato Uni is doing the new medical program, and that's going to make it easier for us to put in a new module, and their focus is on making rural doctors who are going to be, especially in the Waikato, but obviously throughout the country. So that's one element. The other element is we had to choose one place, and there are maybe 3 or 4 very deprived, very rural, high Māori population districts, and we just chose South Waikato.
So basically, according to our research, South Waikato was the most deprived area. This is why we focused on the most deprived area based on the research.
And just for the second half, how do you think it'll transfer to other regions?
I think that New Zealand, like rural, high deprivation New Zealand, I think is quite similar, although the community structures in place will be different. So it will need to be applied to the unique communities, but there will be a lot of overlap between those areas. Yeah.
And I guess since we are evaluating our plan and what we are doing, so if we had a good result and if we succeed in implementing our plans in South Waikato, that would give us an indicator that actually this is doable and we can implement it in New Zealand overall.
Yeah, I think additionally the advantage of what we're proposing is that it is flexible, so we're not trying to do a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a model, and we're taking that model into different communities, ideally, of consultation and community involvement, and so it would look a little bit different everywhere we went because different communities will identify slightly different things. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
In South Waikato, we also had Tokoroa, and my Cook Island friend refers to Tokoroa as the 16th star of the Cook Islands. So I'm just wondering in terms of consideration for the Pacific whānau, but equally also wondering whether you would bring in a lot of mātauranga around dying, so obviously leaning into Te Ao Māori and also Pacific communities is how do they handle dying in a dignified way within their communities, and teaching from that perspective, would that be part of your
Can I speak to that? Yeah, I'm really glad you asked because I think we recognised in our group how a lot of our Māori and Pacific whānau have so much knowledge that we can, I guess, not use, it's probably a bad word, that is such an amazing resource for motions like this. And so I think that initial consultation is so crucial and shapes so much of it because we're acknowledging that mātauranga and that we're actually starting from a place of deficit ourselves as providers. And so we need to be asking people who know better, to be honest. That's my answer.
I'll just quickly add, we're very focused on the upstream things, so we really want to enable the communities and the services that already exist, and they're the ones who really have the knowledge. So we're not really coming in to do the education or do any of these things. We want to enable the people who know how to do it to do it.
Hi, Sunny.
Gaps in our current healthcare systems related to access to palliative
just repeat the question. I forgot to do that the last couple. Sunny has just asked what are the actual impacts on patients of the gaps we've seen in our research in palliative care to these communities. Did anyone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think some of the research that we were looking into was like narrative experiences of like lived experiences of inequities. And linking back to that question you asked earlier as well, when it comes to palliative healthcare or just palliative, there is no specific word for palliative. So there are a lot of challenges in things when considering like the communication around dying and death. So I guess we have included some of these voices in our structures and in our plans, but it is very important to have these WHOIs, have these situations where we can hear more voices. And then our ambassador is also like a community-driven person. So that will be selected and elected by those WHOIs and finding out like the perfect piece or group of people who can sort of lead this forward. That makes sense.
Yes, we did thought about that. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, because our budget is very limited, we wanted to simplify our plan, if I can say, and focus more on implementing the palliative care modules for like medical students as an upstream plan. It would be very beneficial if we can also implement that for the nurses and the paramedics and other health professionals, but unfortunately, because of our budget and because of the limited resources that we actually have, we thought that focusing on medical students would give us a better result. But I would also like to add, we didn't implement this in our plan, but if we can actually allow district nurse to provide palliative care for rural patients, that would be very helpful. Because from our agency's appointments, we found that actually district nurses are not allowed, according to the law or to their contract, to provide this palliative care, but they obviously decide to do it because of the community and the community compassion that the nurses have. So if, by starting and implementing our plan as an initial move, and then going forward to different specialities and health professionals, that would absolutely benefit the rural population.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we did identify that, GPs aren't the only ones that can provide that service, and it's so helpful if we do have other people who can do it. And so the idea of creating this curriculum and a really dedicating a lot of resources to that is that we can hopefully then broaden the scope of that and put it into these different training areas, as long as they accept that.
Just adding on to that, when we thought about the initial research and training gaps and palliative care needs in the modules, we are not thinking of just medicine. We are thinking of other specialties as well. So this module could be further integrated into other specialties and can be changed and depending on the need of that specialty.
But since Waikato University just established their medical course, it would be easier to implement it in something that we are just starting it rather than just manipulating other modules from other universities.
Okay, sorry. Now we're just going to have a short break. So if
Students can look at the evaluations. This is your time to do the evaluations. Assessors, this is your time to decide on who's the winner for the Waikato stream. So if we could be back just before 10 past, because we need to, well, make it 5 past, because we need to link in with the Zoom link for Auckland.